Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. It's Thursday, February 26, 2026. And today, we're going to try to do something that feels, honestly, increasingly impossible in our current media landscape.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Right. We're going to try to cut through the absolute wall of noise out there. The hot takes, the tweet storms, the panic. And we want to actually find the signal in what is, frankly, a massive stack of global updates.
It is a really heavy stack today, and I mean that literally and metaphorically. We've got everything from the churning molten center of the Earth to the absolute edges of the cosmos, and, well, a whole lot of political friction in between.
We really do. And I want to set the stage here for you because the stories we pulled for this deep dive, they share this weird quality. They are mind-bending. I don't use that word lightly.
No, it's the right word.
We are talking about a literal glitch in Earth's gravity caused by crystals forming deep underground. We have a lost version of the Trojan War discovered on a muddy farm floor in England.
And on a much more serious, immediate note, a very high-stakes game of what I would call nuclear poker happening right now in Geneva between the United States and Iran.
Exactly. So the mission today is to look at the planet from the core all the way up. We're going to unpack the science, the history, the tech, the politics.
And crucially, we're going to try to figure out how a crystal in the mantle connects to a stock market dip in New York. Because in a complex system, it's all connected.
It always is. Okay, let's unpack this. I want to start with the ground beneath our feet. Because apparently it is not as stable or as constant as I always thought it was.
Right. You were talking about the gravity glitch.
The gravity glitch. I saw this headline in Popular Mechanics, and I had to read it twice. It says that between 2019 and 2021, Earth's gravity just sort of fluctuated.
It did. And to really understand this, we have to look at data from NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, specifically their GRACE satellites. GRACE stands for Gravity Recovery and Climate Experiment.
Okay, before we get to the actual glitch, help me understand the tool here. How do satellites flying around in space measure gravity on Earth? I mean, I thought gravity was just a constant force pulling us down.
Yeah, that is the really common misconception. Gravity isn't uniform. It depends on mass. So if you are standing on top of a mountain, there is actually more rock beneath you than if you were standing on a boat in the middle of the deepest ocean.
More mass equals more pull.
Exactly. The Earth is a potato, essentially. It's not a perfect sphere. Now, these GRACE satellites are incredibly sensitive. They fly in a pair, one following the exact path of the other, and they constantly measure the distance between themselves with lasers.
Okay.
So if the lead satellite flies over a particularly dense part of the Earth, say a massive iron deposit or a huge ice sheet, that extra gravity pulls the lead satellite forward just a tiny bit faster.
Oh, so the distance between the two satellites actually increases.
Precisely. And they can measure that change down to the width of a human hair. So by mapping the microscopic changes in distance between the satellites, they map the mass of the planet below. Usually, when we see gravity anomalies change over time, we think of surface water.
Like ice melting.
Right. Ice sheets melting in Greenland, massive floods in the Amazon, water is heavy, it moves, and it changes the gravity map.
Because the mass is literally shifting from the ice sheet into the ocean.
Correct. But this time, between 2019 and 2021, the signal was different. It wasn't water, it wasn't ice, it didn't match any of the hydrological models.
If it wasn't on the surface, it had to be underground.
Deep underground, we are talking about the mantle. The culprit appears to be olivine crystallization.
Olivine. That's a green mineral, right? I think I've seen it in jewelry. Peridot.
That's the gem quality version, yeah. But deep in the Earth, olivine is a major component of the upper mantle. It is everywhere down there. What the research suggests is that there was a phase transition. Under immense pressure and temperature, this olivine was crystallizing, morphing on a massive scale.
When you say phase transition, you mean like water turning to ice.
Similar concept, but with solid rock. When olivine gets pushed deeper, the pressure forces its atoms to completely rearrange. It turns into different denser minerals like wadsleyite or ringwoodite. It packs itself much tighter.
And that physical change in a rock, thousands of miles down, was violent enough or massive enough to warp gravity on the surface.
Warp might be a strong word, but it altered the density enough to be detected by those incredibly sensitive satellites. It created a gravitational glitch or anomaly that lasted for 2 solid years.
That is just wild. It makes the Earth feel less like a solid rock and more like a living engine.
That is the perfect analogy. It is dynamic, it is not static, and here is why this really matters and why it's not just cool trivia for geologists. We use that exact same gravity data to measure sea level rise.
Wait, really?
Yes. We assume that if gravity increases over the ocean, it's because the water is rising. But if the gravity is actually increasing because of a crystal shifting 500 miles down, and we attribute it to water up here, our data is entirely wrong. We might be overestimating or underestimating sea level rise simply because we aren't accounting for the noise of the living planet.
So a crystal forming in the dark, thousands of miles down, completely messes up our spreadsheets regarding climate change on the surface.
Exactly. It forces us to integrate geology into climate science in a way we really haven't done before. It creates a baseline problem. If the scale itself is changing, if the Earth's gravity isn't a stable constant, how do you measure the weight of the water?
That is a headache for the modelers.
Speaking of nature doing unexpected, slightly terrifying things, did you see the story about the wolf dog?
The hybrid, yes.
Yeah.
This was in Popular Mechanics as well. A stray dog and a wild wolf produced what they are calling a staggering hybrid. Now, I know dogs and wolves are related. Canis lupus and Canis lupus familiaris, they can breed. But this feels, I don't know, highly problematic. Why is everyone freaking out about this specific puppy?
It is problematic on 2 major fronts, ecological and behavioral. Let's start with the ecology. We spend millions of dollars globally on conservation efforts to protect the wild wolf. We protect their habitats, we track their packs, but the biggest threat might not actually be a hunter. It might be a lonely stray dog.
Because of the genetics.
Right. If you have wild wolves breeding with stray dogs, and let's be honest, in many rural areas around the world there are plenty of stray dogs, you are diluting the wild wolf genetics. You're essentially erasing the wild wolf as a distinct species over time. It is called genetic swamping or genomic extinction.
So the wolf doesn't necessarily die out, it just fades away into a population of mutts?
Exactly. And then you have the behavioral issue. This is the Frankenstein part of the story. A wild wolf has a very specific set of instincts. One of the most important is a deep-seated fear of humans. That fear keeps them alive, and frankly, it keeps us safe.
And dogs have the exact opposite.
Dogs have been co-evolving with us for 15 to 30,000 years, specifically to understand us, to not fear us, and to look to us for food. When you mix those 2 hardwired operating systems, you get a hybrid that might have the predatory drive and jaw strength of a wolf, but the complete lack of fear of a dog.
That sounds like an incredibly dangerous combination.
It creates an animal that is behaviorally completely unpredictable. It might approach a human looking for food, but then react with wolf-like aggression if startled. It's a worst-case scenario for human-wildlife conflict.
And I imagine the legal side is a total nightmare. People want to own these hybrids as pets. They think it's cool to have a wolf in the living room.
That is the other side of the coin, the wolf-dog pet trade. But these animals are not golden retrievers. They can be incredibly difficult to manage, they are notorious escape artists, and they have very complex social needs. In many places, owning one is completely illegal, and for very good reason. It's that classic human desire to tame the wild, but nature usually pushes back.
Nature is definitely pushing back right now in a lot of ways. If we look at the global weather snapshot from just the last few days, whiplash is the only word for it.
It really is. We have reports from the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, the Associated Press, and NASA. And if you put them all on a map, it feels like the planet is just deeply confused.
Let's start in the UK. They just recorded the warmest day of the year so far. It's February. And temperatures hit 18 degrees Celsius. That's roughly 64 degrees Fahrenheit.
Which, sounds delightful.
Right, people are out in parks. It felt like spring. Why is that a bad thing?
It sounds nice to us, but phenologically, in terms of nature's timing, it is dangerous. When you have a false spring like this, trees start to bud early, insects start to hatch. Dormant animals wake up thinking winter is over. And then inevitably, because it is still February, a cold snap hits in March.
And everything just dies?
The buds freeze, the insects die off, the birds that migrated early starve because there's no food. It completely desynchronizes the entire ecosystem. It's not just nice weather, it's a biological trap.
Meanwhile, you look at the U.S. Northeast right now. New York City is buried. They already have huge piles of snow from a previous storm, and now even more snow is falling.
Right.
It is a full-on blizzard situation with visibility issues and total travel chaos.
So we have the UK sunbathing while New York is literally digging out. This is exactly what we mean by extreme variability. The jet stream is getting wobbly.
And then you go down to Colombia. This is the one that really worries me. NASA released satellite imagery of the Cordoba department. It's supposed to be their dry season.
It's supposed to be. And this is critical context. In tropical agriculture, your entire life revolves around the wet season and the dry season. You plant in one, you harvest in the other. It's clockwork.
But an unusual cold front trapped a ton of moisture, and they just got slammed.
Slammed is an understatement. 80% of the department is underwater. 11,000 families displaced.
80%. That's not a flood, that's just a new geography.
Essentially, yes. And this is the real takeaway of the climate segment. It's not just about global warming, meaning everything simply gets hotter by 1 degree. It is about the disruption of established, reliable patterns. If the dry season becomes the wet season, your crops rot in the field. If winter becomes spring, your pollinators die. The infrastructure, the agriculture, the housing, the drainage, it is all built for the old patterns. When those patterns break, the systems collapse.
And we are seeing that collapse in real time in Colombia. Before we leave the planet entirely, I have to mention the penguins. Inside Climate News had a really tough report on emperor penguins.
Yeah, this one is heartbreaking. We are seeing severe sea ice loss in Antarctica happening right during their breeding and molting seasons.
And for those listening who don't know the life cycle, explain why the timing matters so much.
Yeah.
Why is ice loss in February different than ice loss in July for a penguin?
Emperor penguins breed directly on the sea ice. The chicks hatch, and they have this really fluffy gray down. It keeps them warm, but it is absolutely not waterproof. If they fall into the freezing water, they soak through and drown or freeze to death.
Yeah.
They need to stay on completely stable ice until they molt and grow their waterproof adult feathers.
So if the ice breaks up early under their feet.
The entire generation is lost. We are seeing colonies facing catastrophic breeding failure, 100% chick mortality in some specific areas. It is a demographic collapse for the species.
It's a heavy start to the deep dive, I know. But it really sets the stakes. The physical world, the gravity, the weather, the biology, it's all in flux.
Which is perhaps why we are looking so hard at the stars right now.
Perfect transition. Let's go to section 2, the cosmos. And we finally have a name to a mystery that has been bugging space watchers for weeks.
The mystery astronaut.
Yes. NASA finally identified the astronaut who was suddenly evacuated from the International Space Station last month for a medical emergency. It was Mike Fink.
A true veteran. And this is highly significant because NASA is usually a vault when it comes to medical privacy. IPL laws apply even in orbit. But Fink actually came out and spoke about it publicly.
Just for context for you listening, this was the first time a medical issue actually forced an early mission in like this, right?
In this specific way, yes. And it raises a massive looming question for the agency. Right now on the ISS, you are in low Earth orbit. You are roughly 250 miles up. If you get sick, really sick, like a heart attack or appendicitis, you can realistically be back on Earth in a major trauma center in Houston or Kazakhstan in a matter of a few hours. You hop in a capsule, you undock, you land.
It's an ambulance ride. A very fast, very expensive ambulance ride. But an ambulance ride nonetheless.
Exactly. But we aren't planning on staying in low Earth orbit forever. We are looking at Mars.
And Mars is not a few hours away.
Mars is 6 to 9 months away, one way. If you are on the transit vehicle halfway to Mars and you have a severe medical emergency, there is no turning back. You simply can't turn the ship around. You are months away from a hospital.
So Mike Finke's situation is basically a real-world stress test for deep space medical protocols.
It absolutely is. It's forcing NASA to ask hard questions. What diagnostic tools do we actually need on board? What surgical capabilities? Can we even perform remote medicine with a 20-minute communication delay?
That delay is the killer. Houston, I'm cutting the artery, Houston, and then you just wait 40 minutes for an answer.
Exactly. You need total autonomy. You need advanced AI diagnostics. You need to be able to manufacture drugs on board because a lot of pharmaceuticals actually degrade faster in deep space radiation than the trip itself takes. We can't just call for an evac from deep space.
Speaking of getting out to deep space, we had a bit of a setback with Artemis 2.
The crewed moon mission. Yes, the rocket is back in the hangar. The vehicle assembly building over at Kennedy Space Center.
This is the massive mission that's supposed to send 4 astronauts around the moon. Why is it back in the garage?
Helium flow issues in the upper stage.
Helium flow, I mean, it sounds so minor, but I feel like I hear about helium leaks constantly in rocketry. Boeing Starliner had them, now Artemis. Why is helium the ultimate nemesis of space travel?
It comes down to physics. Helium is the second smallest element on the periodic table. The atoms are incredibly tiny. It is the absolute Houdini of gases. It desperately wants to escape through the tiniest microscopic imperfection in a seal or a weld.
But we have to use it.
We need it because it is completely inert.
Ah.
We use it to pressurize the massive fuel tanks. As the rocket burns millions of pounds of fuel, the tank obviously empties. If you don't fill that empty space with something pressurized, the tank would literally crumple in on itself like a cheap soda can under the atmospheric pressure. So we pump in helium to keep it rigid. It's vital, but it's a huge pain to contain.
The Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel, they call it ASAP, released their 2025 annual report, and they were very, very clear. Safety over speed.
And that is deeply ingrained. The post-Columbia, post-Challenger NASA mindset, they are systematically troubleshooting the seals and the flow rates. It's super frustrating for the timeline. I mean, we all want to see humans orbiting the moon again, but it is absolutely necessary for the crew. You do not mess with sketchy seals when you are sitting on top of a controlled explosion.
Better to find the leak in the hangar than halfway to the moon.
100%.
But while the humans are grounded for a minute, the robots are very busy. Tell me about ESCAPADE.
ESCAPADE. It's a great acronym. It stands for Escape and Plasma Acceleration and Dynamics Explorers. This is a fascinating NASA mission headed out to Mars.
And what's the primary goal?
It is investigating the atmosphere, specifically the ancient murder mystery of Mars water. We know for a fact Mars used to be wet and warm. We see ancient river deltas. We see dry lake beds. Now it's essentially a freeze-dried desert. Where did the atmosphere go?
The leading theory is the solar wind, right?
Right. Mars lost its internal magnetic field billions of years ago. Without that invisible shield, the solar wind, that constant stream of highly charged particles flying from the sun, simply stripped the atmosphere away atom by atom over eons.
So ESCAPADE is basically the crime scene investigation team trying to figure out exactly how the robbery happened.
That's a really good way to put it. And they are using 2 spacecraft to do it. That's the key innovation here. By having 2 flying together, they can get a stereo view.
Why does a stereo view matter in empty space?
Think about it. If you have one satellite, you just get a single line of data at one point in time. You don't know if a sudden change in your data is because the satellite physically moved into a new area or because the solar wind itself suddenly changed in intensity. By having 2 satellites flying in formation, you can cleanly separate space and time. You can actually see the 3-dimensional structure of the atmosphere and how the solar wind hits it dynamically.
I love that. Seeing the invisible structures of the solar system. And speaking of seeing things we couldn't before, let's talk about the James Webb Space Telescope. It has apparently been performing brain surgery.
Haha, yeah, that was the great headline from space.com, right? JWST performs brain surgery on the exposed cranium nebula.
The exposed cranium nebula. I have to say, astronomers really have the best names. It sounds like an 80s heavy metal band.
It really does. It's a nebula that visually looks disturbingly like a human skull. But what the Webb telescope did was peer directly through the thick dust, brain surgery, if you will, to see the intricate details of stellar formation happening deep inside. It's resolving individual newborn stars inside this dense cloud of gas that we just couldn't physically see with older telescopes.
It's peeling back the cosmic layers. And on the audio side of things, we are apparently listening to planets now.
This is so cool. This is from the Chandra X-ray Observatory. They just released a planetary parade of sonifications. They took complex X-ray data from Jupiter, Saturn, and Uranus and systematically translated it into audible sound.
Sonification. So, translating data points into audio waves.
Right. For Jupiter, they specifically mapped the X-rays emitting from its auroras, the northern lights of Jupiter, to woodwind sounds.
Woodwinds, like oboes and clarinets.
Exactly. So you can literally listen to the aurora of a gas giant. It's haunting, but it's also a highly valid way to analyze raw data. Humans are very visual creatures, but our ears are actually much better at detecting subtle temporal patterns, like rhythm and pitch changes. Sometimes your ears can pick out an anomaly or a pattern in the data that your eyes completely miss looking at a scatter plot.
That is just so cool. It reminds me that our senses are really just filters, and sometimes changing the filter changes the reality you perceive. Okay, let's come back down to Earth, but stay firmly in the future. Section 3, the future of tech. And we absolutely have to talk about the elephant in the server room. NVIDIA.
The absolute giant, the company that basically is the stock market right now.
So CNBC and the Wall Street Journal are reporting that NVIDIA had just a massive quarter Fiscal 2026, $39.3 billion in revenue. That is up 78% from last year, and profit is $43 billion. These numbers are astronomical. They are making more money than some entire country's GDP.
They are. They're essentially selling the premium shovels in the middle of a massive gold rush, and they happen to be the only hardware store in town.
But here's the twist that caught my eye. The stock market actually fell. The S&P 500 and the Nasdaq dropped after this incredible good news. Explain that paradox to me. How can a company completely crush earnings expectations and still tank the broader market?
This is what analysts are calling the AI economic paradox. Investors are extremely jittery right now. They see these massive revenue numbers for NVIDIA, but they're terrified of the broader AI bubble.
I think it's all going to pop.
They are deeply worried about CapEx, capital expenditure. Big tech companies, your Microsofts, Googles, Metas, Amazons, they are spending billions and billions buying these expensive NVIDIA chips. They are aggressively building out the infrastructure, but they aren't seeing billions in actual profit from consumer AI products yet. The return on investment, the ROI, is moving too slow for Wall Street.
So the investors are essentially saying, you're spending all this money on shovels, but where is the actual gold?
Exactly. And Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, is out there doing damage control, saying the boom is just starting. We're just getting started. He calls it a fundamental new industrial revolution. But the market is impatiently saying, show me the money right now. It is a classic brutal tension between long-term infrastructure building and short-term quarterly profit expectations.
And that infrastructure, it isn't just lines of code floating in the ether. It's heavily physical. We have a great story from TechCrunch about the growing physical backlash to AI.
This is a fascinating cultural shift. We always talk about the cloud like it's this ethereal, weightless thing up in the sky. It's not. It lives in massive data centers, huge concrete warehouses completely full of servers.
And people really don't want them next door anymore.
No, they don't. Communities in Northern Virginia, in Maryland, places that are historically the physical backbone of the internet, are starting to actively block new data centers from being built.
Why the sudden pushback?
Noise, for one big reason. To keep all those high-powered AI chips cool, you need massive industrial fans running constantly. Residents living nearby describe it as a constant low-frequency hum, kind of like a jet engine idling on the tarmac 24/7. It drives people crazy.
I can imagine. And what about the power grid?
They suck up as much electricity as a small city, heavily straining the local grids. And then there's water. They use millions of gallons of fresh water for evaporative cooling systems. In a world increasingly worried about drought and water scarcity, using millions of gallons of drinking water just to cool a chatbot is becoming a very heated political flashpoint locally.
So the AI revolution is thirsty, it's loud, and it's incredibly power hungry.
And because of that, it's becoming a neighbor nuisance.
Yeah.
Tech isn't just viewed as pure economic growth anymore. It's a zoning issue. It's a noise complaint at the city council meeting. That is a major shift in how the general public views the industry.
Speaking of seeing tech intruding on the physical streets, Waymo is expanding again.
Yes, rolling out to Chicago and Charlotte.
Robotaxis in the Windy City. I mean, good luck with that winter driving.
Yeah, that will definitely be the ultimate test. They are starting slowly with mapping, using human safety drivers behind the wheel first. But it clearly shows that Google, or Alphabet, is pushing incredibly hard to normalize this technology. Despite the massive regulatory hurdles, despite the obvious public skepticism, they are expanding the footprint city by city.
I feel like we are creeping toward a world where the car drives itself and the AI handles my schedule entirely. Did you see the big update on Google Gemini?
The agent era. This is a monumental shift in how we interact with software.
Yeah. Gemini can now fully automate multi-step tasks across Android. Like you say, order a ride to the airport and text my wife my ETA. One voice command, multiple different apps engaging.
That has always been the holy grail of digital assistants. We've had basic voice assistants for years, Siri, Alexa, but they were mostly just command and control. Set a timer, play a song. This new update is agency. It's the AI taking a broad intent, like get me to the airport, and independently executing it across different platforms.
It fundamentally changes the interface from tapping on apps to just talking to your phone.
And trusting it. You have to implicitly trust the AI agent to pick the right car service, choose the right price tier, and actually send the right text to the right person.
And if you want to track your stress levels while you're trusting your agent to run your life, well, there's a ring for that now.
The smart ring market is really heating up right now. A startup called Seedy's just launched a new health ring that features a built-in AI coach. It's basically gamifying your daily health metrics.
And on the broader hardware side, Samsung just launched the Galaxy S26 series.
Focusing heavily on what they call intuitive AI, powered by the new Snapdragon 8 Elite chip. It is all converging very rapidly. The phone, the ring, the self-driving car, the massive cloud data centers, it's all becoming one interconnected AI-driven ecosystem that surrounds our daily lives.
Which is exciting, but also, honestly, kind of
A
exhausting.
little bit, yeah. It's a lot to process.
Let's take a break from the hyperfuture and look way, way back. Section 4, Echoes of the Past.
Because this story about the mosaic in England, this is honestly my favorite thing in the stack today.
It is a truly remarkable find. This was covered in Popular Mechanics.
A farmer in Rutland, England, he's just walking on his land, finds some old pottery fragments, does the right thing and calls the archaeologists.
Right, this started back in 2020. They've been carefully excavating it ever since. And usually when you find a Roman mosaic floor in Britain, it depicts a local god or a generic hunting scene, or maybe a standard mythological scene from Homer's Iliad, the Trojan War. Achilles killing Hector. We all know this story. It was basically the Marvel movie, The Ancient World.
We know the Homer version of the story. But this specific mosaic, the archaeologists realized the details were wrong. It didn't actually match the text of the Iliad.
So what is it depicting?
It actually depicts very specific scenes from a play called The Phrygians, written by Aeschylus.
Aeschylus, the famous Greek tragedian.
Yes, but here is the massive kicker. The Phrygians is a lost play. We literally do not have the text. It didn't survive antiquity. We only knew it vaguely existed from passing references and tiny fragments quoted in other ancient books.
Right.
Finding this detailed mosaic is like finding a vibrant movie poster for a film that no one has seen in 2,000 years.
That is just incredible. And it's on a random farm floor in England.
That is the other fascinating part of the story. Rutland was geographically the far edge of the Roman Empire. It was the frontier, the absolute boonies. But this proves that the people living out there, the wealthy elite who owned this villa, were incredibly culturally sophisticated. They weren't just rough soldiers holding the line against the northern barbarians. They knew highly obscure Greek tragedies. They were active patrons of the classical arts.
It totally changes the picture of Roman Britain for me.
Yeah.
It wasn't just mud and stone walls. It was theater and deep literature.
Precisely. It challenges our modern bias that the further you get geographically from Rome, the less sophisticated the culture got. Clearly, looking at this fold, that wasn't true at all.
From a farm in England to the hills of Jerusalem, another major discovery, the Jerusalem Cave Workshop.
This was a highly dramatic one. The Israel Antiquities Authority actually launched a night raid on this place. They caught looters red-handed on Mount Scopus.
Caught them right in the act.
Right in the act, and what they were illegally looting was a completely hidden factory dating back to the Second Temple period, roughly 2,000 years ago.
And what exactly were they mass-producing in this ancient factory?
Chalkstone vessels. Cups, bowls, and mugs meticulously carved out of soft local stone.
Why stone, though? I mean, pottery is so much easier. You just mold wet clay and fire it in a kiln. Hand-carving stone cups seems like it would take forever.
That is exactly where the fascinating cultural context comes in. It's all about complex religious law. Under Jewish law at the time, standard clay pottery could easily become ritually impure. For example, if a lizard fell into your clay pot, or if it simply came into contact with something deemed unclean, you couldn't just wash it and purify it. The rules stated you had to physically smash it. It was garbage.
Okay, that gets really expensive if you're constantly replacing dishes.
It does. But stone, under strict interpretation of the law, does not inherently transmit ritual impurity. It stays culturally kosher. If it gets dirty, you can just rinse it out and keep using it.
Oh, wow. So stone was essentially the sustainable religious life hack of the day.
It was the kosher Tupperware of the ancient world. It beautifully connects hard archaeology directly to internal religious practice and daily domestic life. You look at these heavy stone mugs and you realize everyday people were actively buying these, likely paying a massive premium for them, simply because they wanted to faithfully follow the strict rules of their faith in their own kitchens.
It really grounds the ancient history in something so relatable and human. Like, I don't want to have to smash all my dishes if I accidentally touch them with dirty hands, so I'll just save up and buy the heavy stone ones.
Exactly. Deep religious devotion meeting everyday practicality.
All right, let's move into Section 5. The heavy hitters. Global geopolitics. And we absolutely have to start with the massive story dominating the global headlines right now, the U.S. and Iran.
The Geneva talks.
We have extensive reports from France 24, the Washington Post, and DW. It is the third round of indirect talks happening in Switzerland. But the broader context is, well, incredibly tense.
Tense is really putting it mildly. You have the diplomats sitting in sterile rooms in Geneva trying to hash out some kind of workable nuclear framework. But at the exact same time, President Trump, currently back in office now in 2026, has actively deployed U.S. warships and advanced F-22 Raptors to the Persian Gulf region.
It's the classic speak softly and carry a big stick approach. Or is Washington just aggressively waving the stick right now?
It is a textbook example of what political scientists call coercive diplomacy. The administration's stated strategy is to heavily leverage the credible threat of military force to coerce Iran into a much stricter, more permanent nuclear deal than the previous iterations. On the other side, Iran is publicly accusing Trump of big lies and dangerous aggressive posturing. The U.S. is fundamentally demanding severe, verifiable restrictions on Iran's nuclear enrichment program because the breakout time, which is the time theoretically needed to enrich enough material to build a bomb, is getting dangerously short.
And Iran obviously wants massive economic sanctions relief in exchange.
Right. Their domestic economy is completely crushed by the sanctions. They desperately need the frozen money and the ability to sell oil openly.
And the diplomatic war clock is loudly ticking.
That is the exact phrase being used by analysts. The administration has heavily implied a sort of unofficial deadline. If these talks fail to produce a breakthrough, the military option is very much on the table, and Oman is right in the middle, trying to mediate between the two sides.
Oman always seems to be the trusted mailman in these high-stakes regional situations.
They really are the Switzerland of the Middle East. They are quietly trusted by both Washington and Tehran to carry realistic messages back and forth. But the overall geopolitical analysis here is grim. If these Geneva talks definitively break down, we aren't just looking at another round of financial sanctions. We are looking at a very real potential for kinetic military conflict. Those F-22s aren't parked over there for a friendly air show.
Flipping to another major complex diplomatic move, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is currently in Israel.
Yes, he just addressed the Knesset, the Israeli parliament.
And he dropped a quote that is getting a ton of global traction right now. He clearly stated, "No cause justifies killing civilians."
It is a very strong, highly scrutinized statement, and you really have to look at the broader diplomatic context to understand why it matters. India and Israel have built a very deep, highly lucrative strategic partnership over the years. Joint defense projects, tech sharing, massive agricultural trade. India buys a lot of highly advanced Israeli military hardware. But historically, India also has a very long tradition of leading the so-called Global South and historically supporting Palestinian statehood rights.
So Modi is essentially reaffirming the tight friendship and business ties with Israel, but also explicitly drawing a public moral line regarding the ongoing Gaza conflict and Hamas.
Exactly. He is walking an incredibly fine diplomatic tightrope. He is effectively saying to Israel, we are your strategic partners, we firmly stand with you against terrorism, but we also have strict international standards regarding the protection of civilian life. It represents a subtle but real shift in public tone. It shows that even Israel's closest global allies are feeling the immense domestic and international pressure of the ongoing humanitarian situation.
Let's shift gears to talk about justice and civil rights. We had two major court rulings come down, one in Hong Kong, one in Brazil.
Let's start with the situation in Hong Kong. Jimmy Lai,
The famous media tycoon, the founder of the Apple Daily newspaper, historically a massive thorn in Beijing's side.
he just won a very rare, high-profile legal victory. The Hong Kong Court of Appeal completely overturned his prior fraud conviction. Now, this specific charge was related to a commercial lease dispute, allegedly misusing office space for a private consultancy firm. Observers generally considered it a minor technicality charge to begin with.
So his conviction is overturned. Does that mean he is free to go?
No, and that is the harsh reality check of the situation. He is absolutely not free. He's still currently serving time and facing much more severe pending charges under the sweeping national security law.
So the relatively minor commercial fraud charge goes away, but the heavy collusion with foreign forces charges keep him locked in a cell.
Right. And legal analysts are fiercely debating what this appeal ruling actually means for the region. Is it the Hong Kong judiciary actively showing a genuine spark of independent legal thought? Like, look, we will actually overturn this remarkably weak fraud case to definitively show the world we still independently follow the letter of the law. Or is it just a carefully calculated minor cosmetic concession to ease international pressure while the main political clampdown continues unabated?
It honestly feels more like a minor pressure valve release, not a fundamental change in direction for the city.
I would tend to agree with that assessment. It doesn't fundamentally change the broader trajectory of Hong Kong's legal system. Now, contrast that complex situation with what just happened in Brazil, the Marielle Franco case.
This has been a very long, incredibly painful national saga. She was a prominent city councilwoman in Rio de Janeiro, brutally murdered in a drive-by shooting back in 2018.
A massively rising political star, Black, openly gay, born in the favelas, she constantly spoke truth to deeply entrenched power. She was undeniably assassinated. For years and years, the burning question was who actually ordered the hit? We eventually knew who physically pulled the trigger, but the intellectual mastermind remained totally hidden.
And now the courts finally know.
Yes. Two former prominent lawmakers, the Brazam brothers, were formally convicted by a jury for explicitly ordering the assassination. This is a monumental ruling for Brazil. It is finally closing a dark chapter of violent political impunity. It sends a very clear, necessary signal that you simply cannot murder your political opponents and expect to get away with it forever, even if you're wealthy and powerful, and even if it takes a grueling 8 years to finally get justice.
It restores at least a little bit of faith in the judicial system there.
Moving back to U.S. domestic policy, the Trump administration is making a highly controversial move regarding Medicaid funding.
Specifically targeting Minnesota. They're actively withholding $259 million in federal Medicaid funds. The official reason given by the administration is widespread fraud.
That's the stated official justification. The administration forcefully claims there is rampant mismanagement and lack of basic oversight in Minnesota's state-run program. But critics of the move, and obviously the state officials themselves, are aggressively calling it political punishment. Minnesota is a reliably blue state.
So critics see it as the blatant weaponization of federal funding mechanisms.
That is the core fear being voiced. If the federal government establishes a precedent of arbitrarily cutting off massive health funds to specific states based on ongoing political disputes, simply using oversight as a convenient administrative cover, that fundamentally changes the nature of American federalism. It essentially forces states to fall strictly in line with federal mandates or risk going completely broke.
And very quickly, sticking with U.S. health policy, the new Surgeon General nominee, Casey Means.
She was heavily grilled in the Senate confirmation hearings this week.
The main flashpoints were her past statements on vaccines and agricultural pesticides.
She is a highly controversial, non-traditional pick for the role. She has been incredibly vocal and highly critical of the massive pharmaceutical industry and the processed food industry, directly linking rising chronic disease rates to environmental toxins, agricultural chemicals, and poor national diet.
Which, really resonates deeply with a certain segment of the population, but completely alienates the traditional medical establishment.
Exactly. The Senate hearing was essentially a massive public clash of competing worldviews. Is she a necessary, brave crusader for holistic public health who is finally willing to aggressively challenge Big Pharma? Or is she peddling anti-science rhetoric that is fundamentally dangerous to public health protocols? That was the intense debate happening in the room. It is shaping up to be a very, very close confirmation vote on the floor.
It is definitely going to be a nail-biter. All right, let's take a breath and wrap up with Section 6, Society and Culture, the human element.
Always my favorite section to dig into.
Let's talk about the concept of the work week. We have a fascinating tale of two Americas happening right now. Specifically Latin Americas.
Mexico versus Argentina. Two wildly different, grand economic experiments happening right next to each other in real time.
Mexico just formally passed a major labor bill. They're dropping the mandatory work week from 48 hours down to 40 hours, phasing it in by 2030.
Which finally brings them much more in line with the standards of most of the Western world, giving regular people their weekends back. The core economic argument there is that rested, happy workers are ultimately more productive, efficient workers.
Meanwhile, down in Argentina,
President Javier Milei is pushing aggressively in the exact opposite direction. He wants to legally extend the allowable workday, up to 12 hours.
12 hours. That feels, honestly, somewhat Victorian.
It is a core part of his radical shock therapy for the stagnant Argentine economy. Massive deregulation, total labor flexibility. The administration's argument is that if people simply have the legal freedom to work much longer hours without heavy restrictions, they can personally earn more money, and the broader national economy grows much faster out of the crisis. But the established labor unions are naturally calling it blatant corporate exploitation. It is an incredibly stark contrast in governing. One country actively moving toward mandated work-life balance, the other country pushing toward maximum possible output.
It really is a fascinating real-world experiment and competing economic philosophy happening side by side. We will definitely have to see which approach actually yields a happier, more stable population in a few years. Now, for a brief moment of pure humanity, let's go to a professional football match in Turkey.
Haha, the seagull story.
A literal seagull.
A seagull suddenly collapsed right on the pitch during live play. Heart attack. Pure shock from the noise. We don't really know. But the referee actually stopped the match, and a random fan ran all the way down from the stands onto the grass and performed CPR on the bird.
Chest compressions on a fragile seagull.
With just 2 fingers, I assume? But yes, he actually tried.
Did it actually work?
Unfortunately, local reports say the bird didn't make it, but just the visual image of it, a massive stadium full of tens of thousands of screaming tribal fans suddenly going completely silent, just watching a random guy frantically try to save a dying bird.
It's totally bizarre, but it's also genuinely touching. It shows that basic empathy can just randomly pop up in the absolute weirdest places. Even in a hyper-aggressive, high-adrenaline environment like a football match, you see a suffering creature, and your raw human instinct is just to try and help it.
It is a really nice reminder that we aren't just angry tribal sports fans. We are deeply empathetic humans underneath it all.
And finally, a very quick dip into pop culture. Because, as they say, we contain multitudes. Kanye West's wife, Bianca Censori,
Debuted a totally new look.
a bright pink pixie cut. And naturally, the internet is completely losing its collective mind over it. It is sparking endless conversations about modern fashion, agency, and public identity.
It just keeps the massive celebrity cycle turning. It is the bright visual noise that constantly distracts us from the heavier stuff.
And speaking of noise, Cardi B versus Nicki Minaj.
The massive hip-hop feud that simply never, ever ends.
An alleged total meltdown at the SNL, Saturday Night Live, rehearsals over a perceived slight in a joke. It is the celebrity outrage machine doing exactly what it was built to do.
Distracting us entirely from the planetary gravity glitches and the tense nuclear negotiations in Geneva.
Sometimes maybe we actually need the distraction. So pulling way back, what does this all actually mean? We have covered a massive amount of ground today.
We really have. We went from microscopic crystals deep in the mantle to angry politicians in Geneva.
It feels like there is a lot of fundamentally shifting ground right now.
That is exactly the core theme for me today. Absolute interconnectivity and underlying instability. A random freak drought in Colombia directly affects food prices at your local grocery store. A slight chip shortage or a sudden bubble fear regarding NVIDIA directly affects your personal retirement fund. A lost ancient play randomly found on a muddy floor completely changes our fundamental understanding of human history.
Nothing exists in isolation.
Nothing at all. We live in an incredibly tight, complex web. And when one single string vibrates, whether it is a literal gravity wave or a fiery political speech, the entire global web shakes with it.
Which brings me perfectly to our final thought for the day. And I actually want to go all the way back to that gravity glitch we started with.
Okay, let's go back to the mantle.
We learned today that even the Earth's gravity, literally the fundamental force keeping us tethered, isn't actually a perfect constant. The thing that holds us down, the very definition of being grounded, can glitch. It can completely change because of something quietly happening deep beneath the surface that we can't even perceive.
That is, honestly, a somewhat destabilizing thought to sit with.
But maybe it is also kind of liberating. If the very hard physics of the planet are dynamic and shifting, what other supposed constants in your own life are actually in total flux? What deep assumptions are you tightly holding onto about your career, your personal relationships, your entire worldview that might just be a slow crystallization phase, simply waiting to rapidly shift?
That is a really fantastic question to ponder. Maybe the ground under our feet isn't nearly as solid as we always assume, and that means we actually have the power to move it.
Maybe it is time to deliberately look at the unchangeable things in your own world with a totally fresh pair of eyes. Just like the Webb telescope looking through the dust at that nebula. You might finally find a bright new star forming exactly where you previously thought there was just empty dust.
Or a priceless lost play hidden under the dirt of a farm floor.
Exactly. Keep looking closely. Thanks for diving so deep with us today.
See you all on the next deck.
Bye, everyone.
For enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
Welcome to The Debate. Looking at the state of the world this week, late February 2026, I honestly can't tell if we are witnessing the prelude to a golden age or the opening chapter of a catastrophe. It really feels like we are living in a split-screen reality right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Split screen is well, it's a very polite way to put it.
Right. Because on one side, you have this incredible, almost science fiction level of economic acceleration with AI. But then on the other, you have warships parking off coastlines and, frankly, the most intense nuclear brinkmanship we've seen in decades. So the core question we need to explore today is this. As the U.S. and Iran meet in Geneva, under the shadow of F-22s, and as NVIDIA posts record profits while the IMF sounds the alarm on systemic debt, are we engineering a new global order? Or are we just ignoring the structural cracks in the foundation of the world economy and geopolitical stability?
And I'd argue it's the latter. We are dealing with cognitive dissonance on a planetary scale. We're watching Wall Street try to decide if it wants to party or panic, while simultaneously watching diplomats sit down under the threat of advanced weaponry. It feels less like we are engineering a new world order and more like we are playing casino geopolitics. We are betting the house on an AI bubble, and we're relying on intimidation to solve crises that are, well, they are one wrong button push away from a regional war.
I see the rot you're pointing at, I really do. But I represent the view that what looks like chaos is actually the sound of a new structure being built. I take the position that the muscular geopolitics we're seeing, along with this explosion in tech wealth, represent a necessary, albeit turbulent transition to a new era of stability. Transitions are always messy. But look at the evidence. February 2026 is proving that the peace through strength doctrine is working.
Working? I mean, how can you look at the current map and say it's working?
Let me finish the thought. Because the resumption of nuclear talks with Iran in Geneva is a direct result of the deployment of carrier groups and ultimatums. It forced a calculation. And economically, the AI sector is delivering an absolute miracle. NVIDIA's fiscal 2026 report, showing a $43 billion profit, proves that the fundamentals of a tech-led future are incredibly sound. Yes, there is friction. The S&P 500 has wobbled. But aggressive posturing, whether it's the U.S. and the Middle East or Senator Rubio in the Caribbean, is necessary to stabilize these regions against external influence.
I have to strongly disagree with that framing. The world is closer to conflict than resolution right now. The war clock is ticking down. Deploying F-22 Raptors and carrier groups to the Middle East while you are actively negotiating is reckless. It is not strategic. And on the economic front, the dashboard is flashing bright red warning signs. The IMF has explicitly warned that U.S. debt, which is now over $38 trillion, is on a path to reach 140% of GDP. But that debt...
The AI boom you mentioned is masking a deep rot in the real economy. Look at Stellantis. They just posted their first ever annual loss. That shows traditional industry is suffering globally. While Wall Street obsesses over NVIDIA, the actual planet is bleeding. We have horrific violence in Culiacan, Mexico, and we have ignored humanitarian funding gaps in South Sudan. We are celebrating wealth concentration while the global foundation fractures.
Well, let's unpack that, because I think the doom and gloom narrative misses the actual results on the ground. Let's start with the geopolitics of brinkmanship, specifically the Middle East and Europe. We have U.S. and Iranian delegations meeting for a third round of talks in Geneva regarding the nuclear program. A few months ago, pundits said this was impossible. They said the relationship was too fractured, yet here they are.
Brought to the table or brought to the edge, because
they are at the table. And look who is in the room. Rafael Grossi, the Director General of the IAEA. His presence means this isn't just political theater. It's a technical, highly substantive negotiation about inspections and centrifuges. That simply does not happen if the Iranians feel safe enough to just ignore the West. The military buildup provided the leverage necessary to force diplomacy, and we see a parallel with Ukraine. We have U.S. and Ukrainian officials meeting in Geneva at the exact same time that Russia is pounding Kyiv and Kharkiv with missiles. It shows diplomatic channels remain open despite kinetic warfare.
I think that parallel actually proves my point. We have normalized a state of kinetic warfare, which is just a sterile way of saying people are dying in the streets while diplomats drink coffee in Switzerland. The fact that negotiations are happening despite the missiles isn't a sign of resilience. It's a sign that the international system has failed to stop the violence.
But you have to negotiate while the conflict is happening, otherwise you never get to peace.
Yes, but diplomacy at gunpoint historically doesn't have a great shelf life. You have to look at the broader context. The U.S. isn't just sending diplomats. They are flooding the zone with high-end weaponry. And the rhetoric coming out of the region is completely toxic. The Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi just described the opposing side as a genocidal regime, pointing directly to the 70,000 dead in Gaza since late 2023. When you have that level of visceral anger and immense human loss, parking a stealth fighter nearby doesn't cool things down. It makes accidental war highly probable.
It's a deterrent. It changes the risk calculus for regional actors.
Does it? Look at North Korea. Kim Jong-un just pledged an irreversible nuclear buildup. He's not deterred, he's accelerating. The message regimes are getting globally isn't to negotiate, it's to get a nuclear weapon as fast as possible so you can't be intimidated. And even within the Western alliance, the strategy of economic pressure is fracturing. Germany just declared that the topic of seizing Russian assets is officially closed.
Well, Germany closing the door on seizing those assets isn't a fracture. That's an adherence to the rule of law.
It's economic self-preservation. They know that if they seize sovereign assets, they are telling the rest of the global south, countries like Brazil, India, Saudi Arabia, that their money isn't safe in Western banks if they ever disagree with foreign policy. It breaks the trust that the global financial system relies on. So we have a fractured economic front in Europe and a highly combustible military front in the Middle East. That is a very, very fragile balance.
Speaking of the global south and the Americas, let's pivot to the Caribbean, because this is where that fragility is being actively tested right now. We had a shootout involving a U.S.-flagged speedboat in the Cuban Coast Guard this week. 4 people dead. And we have Senator Marco Rubio visiting the Caribbean to rally support against Venezuela and Cuba amidst oil blockades. You might view this as heavy-handed interventionism, but I see it as essential housekeeping.
Housekeeping. We are talking about sovereign nations, not a backyard to be tidied up.
The reality is the Caribbean's becoming a corridor for chaos. Narcotics, human trafficking, external influence from rival powers. If the U.S. doesn't project order there, the instability spills over. Look at Culiacan in Mexico. The BBC is reporting that cartel feuds have turned it into a literal war zone. That kind of violence doesn't respect borders. The economic pressure on regimes like Cuba and Venezuela is a tool to force democratic transition and remove the destabilizing elements that fuel this broader regional chaos. Rubio is reinvigorating a focus that is desperately needed.
But the policy is strangulation. It causes massive humanitarian suffering, not political change. That shootout you mentioned didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened in water squeezed by a decades-long U.S. blockade. We are seeing reports right now that the Cuban medical sector, which historically was world-class, is struggling to even treat pediatric cancer because they cannot input the necessary supplies. That is the human cost of this projection of order.
The goal is to force a change in leadership that would ultimately benefit those citizens.
By starving them out, and notice the hypocrisy here. The U.S. demands regional order but actively creates chaos by cutting energy supplies, which literally forces Cuba to rely on Russia and Mexico for oil. And the region sees right through it. When Rubio went to the CARICOM summit in St. Kitts, Caribbean leaders pushed back hard. They fear the strategy erodes international law. And regarding Culiacan being a war zone, that is the direct result of decades of the exact interventionist drug war strategy you are defending. Militarized policing decapitates cartel leadership and leaves a power vacuum filled by extreme violence. The strategy is failing.
Economy. You can criticize the foreign policy, but the global market is still voting for American innovation. Let's look at NVIDIA. They reported a massive $43 billion profit. That record revenue proves the AI revolution is real, and it is the primary driver of future global growth.
Yes, NVIDIA is profitable, but the S&P 500 still fell. The market is highly volatile because the foundation is weak.
The market dip is just short-term profit-taking. Sell the news. The deeper truth is that innovation is scaling. Alphabet's robotics unit, Intrinsic, Waymo expanding its autonomous tech to Chicago and Charlotte. These advancements are going to solve the massive productivity issues we face globally. And if you look outside the West, the EBRD report showed resilient growth in sub-Saharan Africa. The global economy is weathering these geopolitical storms precisely because tech-led innovation is pulling it forward. This growth will eventually make the debt burden manageable.
Manageable? The IMF warning this week was absolutely stark. We are looking at $38 trillion in U.S. debt and a 140% debt-to-GDP ratio by 2031. That is mathematically unsustainable, and inflation isn't expected to hit targets until 2027. You cannot pay off a $38 trillion systemic debt crisis with a chatbot.
It's not about chatbots. It's about the massive leap in efficiency that AI represents across all sectors, from logistics to medicine. If AI doubles worker output, GDP outpaces the debt.
But the real economy is already hurting. Look at Stellantis. They are a massive global employer, a cornerstone of traditional manufacturing, and they just posted their first ever annual loss. This isn't just a transition. This signals a deep crisis in consumer demand and industrial health. We are creating a bifurcated reality where Silicon Valley lives in a golden age and the manufacturing sector collapses.
Stellantis is navigating a very specific, difficult transition from internal combustion to electric vehicles. It's a sectoral shift, not a death spiral.
It represents a broader failure to support the working class. The wealth simply is not trickling down. While tech companies boast $43 billion profits, look at the global south. Look at South Sudan. They are facing a $29 million funding gap to help 1.9 million displaced people. $29 million is a rounding error for a company like NVIDIA. The global financial system is fundamentally failing the most vulnerable people on the planet, while inflating massive asset bubbles in the West. That is not a stable New World Order.
I acknowledge the disparity. It is tragic. But you don't solve the funding gap in South Sudan by stifling the very technological engines that are generating global wealth. The volatility we see in February 2026, whether it's diplomatic tension in Geneva or stock market fluctuations on Wall Street, is the friction of progress. We are actively negotiating a new nuclear status quo, and we are building a completely new digital economy. The metrics, from NVIDIA's unprecedented growth to the resilient GDP in parts of Africa, suggest we are on the right path, even if it is a difficult one.
I think we are walking a tightrope over a canyon. We are celebrating these isolated stock market highs while the real world deals with crushing systemic debt, failing infrastructure, and literal starvation in conflict zones. In the UK right now, budget supermarkets are having to raise pay just to keep staff from falling into poverty. The peace we have is incredibly fragile, and the wealth we are generating is hyper-concentrated.
It's certainly a pivot point. The reliance on these big bets, betting on AI to save the global economy and betting on military leverage to maintain the peace, it is undeniably a high-risk strategy.
A strategy that leaves absolutely no room for error. If the AI bubble bursts, or if an interception over the Middle East goes wrong, the cascading effects on a deeply indebted, highly polarized planet will be catastrophic.
That is the tightrope of 2026. The stakes are immense, and the balance is fragile. Thank you for listening to the debate. There is always more to explore in the material, and we encourage you to look at the different perspectives shaping our world.
We'll see you next time.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Nope. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.